The mare's final breath left her body just as Elena Morales pressed her trembling hand against the animal's swollen belly, and in that moment she understood that both mother and foal were lost to her forever. The night air hung thick and oppressive across the Montana Territory Ranch in late August of 1882, carrying with it the scent of dry grass and distant sage. Elena had been 22 years old for exactly 3 weeks, and in those 3 weeks she had buried her father to consumption, watched her older brother ride off to seek fortune in the California goldfields, and now knelt in the dirt of the stable watching the last of her father's prized breeding mares slip away into death. The foal inside had stopped moving hours ago, and Elena had known, deep in the hollow space where hope used to live, that she was watching the end of everything her family had built. She did not cry immediately. The tears came slowly at first, like the first drops of a summer storm, then built into something that shook her entire body. Her hands moved frantically over the mare's still warm body, as if she could somehow call back the life that had just departed. The lantern light flickered against the stable walls, casting long shadows that seemed to mock her grief. She had delivered foals before, had seen birth and death in equal measure on this land, but this felt different. This felt like the final nail in a coffin that had been slowly closing since her mother died giving birth to a stillborn son 6 years ago. Elena pressed her forehead against the mare's neck and let herself break apart. She did not hear the footsteps approaching, did not register the presence of another person until a shadow fell across the lantern light and a man's voice, rough but gentle, spoke from the stable doorway. "I saw your light from the road," he said. "Thought maybe you were having trouble." Elena lifted her head sharply, her face wet with tears, her dark hair falling loose from its braid. The man in the doorway was tall, broad-shouldered, with dust covering his clothes and a battered hat in his hands. He looked to be perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-weathered skin and eyes that held a carefulness she recognized as the mark of someone who had seen his share of suffering. "She is dead," Elena said, her voice breaking on the words. "The foal, too. I tried everything, but I could not save them." The cowboy stepped into the stable, moving slowly as if approaching a spooked horse. He glanced at the mare, then at Elena, and something shifted in his expression. Without a word, he walked to where she knelt and lowered himself to sit in the dirt beside her, his back against the stable wall. "I am sorry," he said simply. Elena stared at him, confused by this stranger's presence, by his unexpected kindness. "You do not need to stay. I am fine." "You are not fine," he said, not unkindly, "and I have nowhere else to be tonight." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him to leave, but the words would not come. Instead, she turned back to the mare, her hand still resting on the animal's cooling flank. The cowboy sat in silence beside her, and somehow his presence made the grief feel less suffocating, less like it might swallow her whole. "What was her name?" he asked after a long moment. "Estrella," Elena whispered. "My father brought her from Texas when I was 15. She was the foundation of his breeding program. He wanted to create the finest quarter horses in the territory." She laughed bitterly. "Now she is gone, and the dream dies with her." The cowboy was quiet, letting her words settle in the air between them. Then he said, "My name is Jacob Thorne. I have been riding since Colorado looking for ranch work. Heard there might be opportunities in this territory." Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dirt across her cheek. "Elena Morales. And I am sorry, but there is no work here. This ranch is dying." "Looks like it has good bones," Jacob said, glancing around the stable. "Solid construction. Someone knew what they were doing when they built it." "My father," Elena said. "He knew horses better than he knew anything else. Better than he knew how to stay healthy, apparently." The bitterness in her voice surprised her. Jacob did not offer platitudes or empty comfort. He simply sat there, solid and steady, and Elena found herself talking, words spilling out that she had told no one else. She spoke of her father's long illness, of watching him waste away while trying to keep the ranch running. She spoke of her brother Miguel's departure, of how he had looked at the struggling ranch and decided his future lay elsewhere. She spoke of the loneliness that had settled over the property like dust, of how she had been trying to manage everything alone for months. Estrella was pregnant when my father died, Elena said. I thought if I could deliver a healthy foal, if I could continue his breeding line, maybe it would mean something. Maybe it would mean he did not work himself to death for nothing. She gestured helplessly at the dead mare. I was wrong. You cannot control everything, Jacob said quietly. Sometimes animals die. Sometimes, despite doing everything right, things go wrong. That does not mean your father's work meant nothing. Elena turned to look at him, really look at him for the first time. His face was weathered but honest, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than he frowned. There was something about the way he held himself, a quietness that spoke of deep waters running beneath a calm surface. Why are you here? She asked him. Really, why did you stop? Jacob was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the stable walls. I lost my own father 3 months ago, he said finally. Ranch accident. Thrown from a horse, broke his neck. I was there when it happened, watched him die in the dirt, and there was not a damn thing I could do to stop it. He paused, his jaw tightening. I know what it is like to feel helpless, to feel like everything you care about is slipping away and you cannot hold on to it no matter how hard you try. Elena felt something crack open in her chest, some tightly held knot of isolation loosening. I'm sorry, she said softly. Me too, Jacob replied. They sat together in the stable as the night deepened around them. The lantern burned low, casting warm light over the tragedy of the dead mare and the unexpected connection forming between two grieving strangers. Jacob did not try to fix anything or make her feel better with false cheer. He simply sat beside her, his presence a quiet anchor in the storm of her emotions. As the hours passed, Elena found herself telling him more. She spoke of her mother, of how the loss had changed her father, turning him from a jovial man who sang while he worked into someone haunted and driven. She spoke of her own dreams, of wanting to prove herself capable of running the ranch, of showing the neighboring ranchers who looked at her with pity that she was more than just a girl playing at being a rancher. They do not take me seriously, she said, anger creeping into her voice. The feed store owner talks to me like I am a child. The veterinarian never comes when I call, always has an excuse. They are waiting for me to fail so they can buy the land cheap. Then do not fail, Jacob said simply. Elena laughed, the sound harsh in the quiet stable. Easy to say, but look around you. I cannot even save one mare. This was not about you failing, Jacob said firmly. This was about an animal having complications. It happens. My father lost horses. Every rancher loses horses. That does not make them failures. It feels like failure, Elena said quietly. I know, Jacob replied, but feelings are not always facts. The words settled over her like a blanket, offering not comfort exactly, but something steadier, a kind of truth she needed to hear. As midnight approached and gave way to the small hours of morning, Elena felt exhaustion pulling at her bones. But she did not want to move, did not want to leave Estrella alone in the darkness. Jacob seemed to understand without her saying anything. He shifted slightly, stretching his long legs out in front of him, settling in as if he had all the time in the world. Tell me about the horses your father bred, he said. What made them special? Elena hesitated, then began to talk about bloodlines and confirmation, about the way her father could look at a horse and see its potential. She talked about the long hours spent training colts, about the satisfaction of watching a young horse mature into something magnificent. Jacob listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he knew horses himself, that he understood what she was talking about. You have a good eye, he said, after she had described her training methods. I can tell you know what you are doing. Knowing what to do does not always mean being able to do it alone, Elena said. The work is too much for one person. The fences need mending, the barn roof leaks, the water pump breaks down every other week. I spend so much time on repairs that I barely have time for the horses anymore. What if you had help? Jacob asked. Elena turned to him, her eyes narrowed. I already told you I cannot afford to hire anyone. I was not talking about hiring, Jacob said carefully. I was talking about partnership. I do not understand. Jacob ran a hand through his hair, leaving it standing up in places. I have some money saved, not a lot, but enough to get by for a while. I know horses, know ranch work. I need a place to start over, somewhere I can build something new. He met her eyes directly. You need help keeping this place running. Maybe we could help each other. Elena stared at him, suspicion and hope warring in her chest. You want to partner with me? You do not even know me. For all you know, I am a terrible rancher who killed this mare through incompetence. But I do not think that, Jacob said. I think you are someone who has been dealt a hard hand and is doing her best to play it. I think you care about this place and these animals. I think you are honest and hardworking, and those are the qualities that matter, Skar. He paused. I am not asking you to decide tonight. I'm just saying think about it. Let me stay on for a week, help with the work, see how we manage together. If it does not work out, I will move on. No hard feelings? Elena wanted to say no, wanted to tell him she did not need anyone's help, that she could manage fine on her own. But the words stuck in her throat because they would have been a lie. She was drowning, and he was offering her a rope. 1 week, she said finally. Then we talk. Fair enough, Jacob said. The night continued its slow march toward dawn. At some point, Elena's head drooped, exhaustion finally claiming her. She felt herself listing sideways and jerked awake, but Jacob's hand caught her shoulder gently. Rest, he said. I will keep watch. Elena wanted to protest, but her eyes were so heavy, her body so tired. She let herself lean against the stable wall and somehow found her head had come to rest against Jacob's shoulder. She thought she should move, thought it was improper, but he did not seem to mind, and she was too tired to care about propriety. His shoulder was solid and warm, and for the first time in months, she felt something like safety. She drifted in and out of a light sleep, aware of Jacob's steady breathing beside her, of the way he sat perfectly still so as not to disturb her rest. Once, she woke fully to find him humming quietly, a tune she did not recognize but found comforting. Their eyes met in the lantern light, and he gave her a small smile. Sorry, he murmured. Old habit. My mother used to sing that when I could not sleep as a boy. It is nice, Elena whispered, and let her eyes close again. The sky began to lighten so gradually that at first Elena thought she was imagining it. But slowly, inexorably, the black of night gave way to deep blue, then to the soft gray pink of approaching dawn. Jacob stirred beside her, and Elena lifted her head from his shoulder, suddenly embarrassed. I am sorry, she said quickly. I did not mean to fall asleep on you. You needed rest, Jacob said simply. He stood and stretched, his joints cracking, then offered her his hand. Elena took it and let him pull her to her feet. Her body ached from sitting on the hard ground all night, and her eyes felt gritty with exhaustion and dried tears. Together they stood looking down at Estrella's body in the growing light. The tragedy seemed somehow less overwhelming in the dawn, still painful, but no longer world-ending. I will help you bury her, Jacob said, after breakfast, if you will have me. Elena nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. They walked out of the stable together into the cool morning air. The sun was just beginning to peek over the eastern horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The ranch spread out around them, shabby and struggling, but still standing. Still hers. I have eggs, Elena said, her voice rough from crying and lack of sleep, and coffee. It is not much, but you are welcome to it. Sounds like a feast, Jacob said with a gentle smile. They walked toward the small ranch house, and Elena felt something shift inside her. The grief was still there, sharp and heavy, but it was no longer the only thing she felt. There was also a strange, tentative hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, she was not as alone as she had thought. Over the next week, Jacob proved himself worth his salt, and then some. He rose before dawn and worked until well after sunset, mending fences with steady efficiency, patching the barn roof, fixing the temperamental water pump. Elena worked alongside him, initially watching him with careful suspicion, waiting for him to reveal some hidden agenda or ulterior motive. But day after day, he simply worked. He spoke little, but listened much, and when he did offer opinions, they were thoughtful and practical. They buried Estrella on a small rise overlooking the eastern pasture. Jacob dug the grave himself, refusing Elena's offer to help, and they stood together in silence as the sun set over the raw earth. Elena said a few words in Spanish, a prayer her mother had taught her, and Jacob bowed his head respectfully. On the third day, as they worked together repairing a section of corral fence, Jacob said, "You have 3 mares left, plus the geldings you use for ranch work. What is your plan for them?" Elena hammered a nail into place before answering, "I have a stallion over at the Peters Ranch. I board him there because I do not have the facilities to keep him separate. I was planning to breed the mares to him this season, but now I am not sure. The stud fees and boarding costs are high, and if something goes wrong again—" She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "What if we brought the stallion here?" Jacob suggested. "Built a proper paddock for him. It would cost money up front, but save in the long run." "We do not have the materials," Elena said. "The old shed out behind the barn," Jacob said. "It is falling apart anyway. We could salvage the lumber from it, use it to build the paddock. Would not be fancy, but it would work." Elena considered this, turning the idea over in her mind. It made sense, but it also meant commitment, meant investing in a future she was not sure existed. That would take time, a lot of work. "I have time," Jacob said. "Question is, do you want to do this? Do you want to keep your father's dream alive? Or are you just going through the motions until you can sell?" The question hit her like a slap. Elena set down her hammer and looked at him directly. "I do not want to sell. This is my home, my family's legacy. But wanting something and being able to achieve it are 2 different things." "So we make it achievable," Jacob said. "We do not try to do everything at once. We focus on what matters most. Get the stallion here, breed the mares, deliver healthy foals, sell them for good money. Use that money to make more improvements, 1 step at a time." "You keep saying we," Elena said quietly, "but you have only been here 3 days. You do not owe me anything." Jacob was quiet for a moment, his hands still on the fence post he had been setting. "I know I do not owe you anything," he said finally. "But I meant what I said that first night. I need a place to start over, and this feels right. You feel right. This partnership, I mean." Elena felt her cheeks warm at his words, at the way he had corrected himself. She had been trying very hard not to notice how handsome Jacob was, how capable and steady, how safe she felt when he was near. It would be foolish to develop feelings for a man she barely knew, a drifter who might leave at any moment, but her heart seemed to have its own ideas about what was foolish. 1 month, she heard herself say. "Stay for 1 month. Help me get the stallion settled, start the breeding program, then we will talk about a more permanent arrangement." Jacob smiled, and Elena felt her foolish heart skip. 1 month, he agreed. That evening, as they sat on the porch eating a simple dinner of beans and cornbread, Elena asked, "Where is your family from originally? You said you were in Colorado, but you do not sound like you were from there." "Kansas," Jacob said. "My father moved us to Colorado when I was 12, bought a small ranch. My mother died the first winter there, fever. After that, it was just me and my pa." He stared out at the darkening landscape. "He taught me everything I know about horses and cattle, about hard work and integrity, about doing right by people even when it costs you something." "He sounds like a good man," Elena said softly. "He was the best man I ever knew," Jacob replied. His voice was steady, but Elena could hear the grief underneath. "I wish I could have saved him." I replay that day over and over, wondering if there was something I could have done differently, if I had noticed something was wrong with the horse sooner, if I had convinced him not to ride that day. "It was not your fault," Elena said firmly. I know that in my head, Jacob said, but my heart is slower to accept it. Elena understood that completely. She understood the weight of guilt that came with being unable to prevent tragedy, the way it could wrap around your lungs and make it hard to breathe. I blamed myself when my mother died, she said. I was 16. I knew she was in labor, knew something was wrong. I rode to get the doctor, but it was too far. And by the time we got back, she was already gone. I thought if I'd ridden faster, pushed the horse harder, maybe I could have saved her. You were 16, Jacob said gently. You did what you could. So did you, Elena replied, meeting his eyes. They sat in silence for a while, the evening cooling around them, crickets beginning their nightly chorus. Elena felt something shifting between them, some deepening of understanding and connection. She told herself it was just the bond of shared grief, the comfort of talking to someone who understood loss. But she knew deep down that it was more than that. Over the following weeks, Elena and Jacob fell into a rhythm. They worked side by side during the day, their movements becoming synchronized as they learned each other's habits and strengths. Jacob proved to be an excellent horseman, patient and intuitive with the animals. Elena found herself watching him work with the geldings, admiring the quiet confidence in his movements, the gentle firmness in his voice. They brought the stallion home from the Peters Ranch on a warm September morning. The horse was a magnificent bay, tall and muscular with the intelligent eye and a proud bearing. Jacob helped Elena settle him into the newly constructed paddock, and they stood together watching him explore his new space. He is beautiful, Jacob said. Your father had an eye for quality? His name is Ray, Elena said. It means king in Spanish. My father bought him from a rancher in New Mexico 3 years ago, said he had the best bloodlines he had ever seen. He is going to throw beautiful foals, Jacob said. If we manage the breeding right, you could build a reputation that reaches beyond Montana. Elena looked at him in surprise. That was my father's dream. He wanted to be known across the territory for producing quality horses. So let us make it happen, Jacob said simply. As they worked on breeding schedules and mare management, Elena found herself relying more and more on Jacob's opinion. He had a knack for understanding horses, for seeing potential and problems that others might miss. But more than that, she found herself simply enjoying his company. The loneliness that had been her constant companion for months began to recede, replaced by something warmer and more complicated. They talked while they worked, sharing stories and dreams. Jacob told her about his mother, who had loved to paint watercolors of the prairie landscape. Elena told him about her brother, about the complicated mix of anger and understanding she felt at his departure. They argued occasionally, usually about the best approach to training or land management, but their arguments were never bitter. They challenged each other, pushed each other to think differently, and always came to a resolution. One evening in late September, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jacob said, "It has been a month." Elena felt her stomach tighten. She had been dreading this conversation, dreading the possibility that he might leave. "Yes," she said carefully. "It has." "I want to stay," Jacob said, turning to face her, "if you will have me. Not just as hired help, but as a true partner. 50-50 on everything, the work, the decisions, the profits when they come." Elena's heart was pounding. "That is very generous, but you would be taking on a lot of risk. This ranch is still struggling. There is no guarantee we will turn a profit." "I know the risks," Jacob said, "but I believe in what we are building here, and I believe in you." The way he said those last words, the intensity in his eyes, made Elena's breath catch. "Jacob," she said softly, "I need to know. Is this just about the ranch?" Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "No. It stopped being just about the ranch about 2 weeks ago, if I am being honest." Elena felt relief and terror in equal measure. "I have been trying not to notice," she admitted. "Trying not to care that you are kind and hardworking and make me laugh. Trying not to think about what it would feel like if you left." "I am not leaving," Jacob said firmly. "Not unless you tell me to go. I do not want you to go, Elena whispered. Jacob reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. When she did not move, he took her hand in his calloused fingers warm against her skin. Elena Morales, he said softly, I have been alone for a long time. I thought after my father died that I would always be alone, that there was nothing left for me but work and survival. But then I found you crying over a dead horse in a stable, and everything changed. Elena felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of grief this time. You sat with me until dawn, she said. You did not try to fix me or make me feel better with empty words. You just sat with me. Sometimes that is all another person needs, Jacob said, someone to sit with them in the darkness until the light comes back. Elena turned her hand in his, threading their fingers together. I think I am falling in love with you, she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a month, but I cannot seem to help it. Jacob's face broke into a smile, wide and genuine and full of joy. Then we have that in common, he said, because I have been falling for you since you looked up at me with dirt on your face and tears on your cheeks and told me you were fine. Elena laughed, a sound of pure happiness that surprised her with its lightness. I was not fine at all. I know, Jacob said, and then he leaned forward and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, careful and sweet, and it tasted like hope and new beginnings. Elena kissed him back, her free hand coming up to cup his cheek, and felt the last of her walls crumble. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. Stay with me, Elena whispered. Not just for the ranch, but for this, for us. I am not going anywhere, Jacob promised. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Elena's life. They worked together during the day and sat together in the evenings, learning the contours of each other's hearts. Jacob was affectionate but respectful, never pushing for more than Elena was ready to give. They held hands while walking the property line, stole kisses in the barn when they thought no one was watching, talked late into the night about their future together. In October, they successfully bred all 3 mares to Ray. Elena watched the stallion with a mixture of hope and fear, remembering Estrella, but Jacob was there to steady her. It will be different this time, he said. We will watch them carefully, bring in the vet at the first sign of trouble. We will not let what happened to Estrella happen again. The neighboring ranchers began to take notice of the changes at the Morales ranch. The fences were mended, the buildings repaired, the horses looking healthy and well cared for. More than one person made comments about Elena's new hired hand, speculation running rampant about the stranger who had appeared out of nowhere and taken up residence on the property. Elena did not care about gossip. She cared that Jacob made her laugh, that he valued her opinion, that he treated her as an equal partner in every sense of the word. She cared that when she woke from nightmares about her father's death or her mother's final moments, Jacob was there to hold her until the fear passed. She cared that he looked at her like she was the most important person in his world. In November, as the weather turned cold and the first snows dusted the mountains, Jacob asked Elena to marry him. They were in the barn, feeding the horses their evening meal, when he suddenly said, Elena, will you be my wife? Elena dropped the bucket she was holding, scattering grain across the floor. What? Jacob smiled nervously. I know I should probably do this properly, with a ring and down on one knee, but I have been carrying this question around for days, and I cannot wait any longer. He took her hands in his. I love you. I want to build a life with you, not just a ranch. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to face whatever challenges come our way together. So will you marry me? Elena's eyes filled with tears, happy ones this time. Yes, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, I will marry you. Jacob pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, and Elena felt like her heart might burst from the fullness of it. They had known each other for less than 3 months, but she was certain down to her bones that this was right, that Jacob was the person she was meant to find. They were married in December in a small ceremony in town with a few neighbors and friends as witnesses. Elena wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in a trunk, and Jacob wore his best suit, brushed clean of trail dust. They spoke their vows in front of the local minister, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever life brought their way. The winter was harsh that year, with heavy snows and bitter cold, but Elena had never been warmer. She and Jacob moved into the main house together, and Elena discovered the deep joy of sharing her life with someone. They cooked meals together, read by the fire together, made love in the warmth of their bed while snow piled up outside. Jacob taught her card games his father had taught him, and Elena taught him Spanish songs her mother used to sing. In the spring, as the snow melted and new grass began to push through the thawed earth, the 3 bred mares began to show signs of their pregnancies. Elena watched them with careful attention, noting every change in behavior, every shift in appetite. Jacob brought in the veterinarian, a stern older man who had previously refused to come out to the ranch but who seemed impressed by the improvements that had been made. "You have done good work here," the vet said, examining one of the mares. "Your father would be proud." Elena felt emotion clog her throat. "Thank you," she managed to say. The first foal was born on a warm April evening in 1883. Elena and Jacob stayed up all night with the mare, watching as she labored. This time, everything went smoothly. The foal slipped into the world wet and perfect, and the mare immediately began cleaning him, murmuring low sounds of contentment. Elena stood with Jacob's arms around her, tears streaming down her face as she watched the newborn foal struggle to his feet on impossibly long legs. "He is perfect," she whispered. "He is," Jacob agreed, his own voice thick with emotion. "You did it, Elena. Your father's breeding program lives on." The other 2 mares delivered healthy foals in the following weeks, both strong and well-formed. Elena and Jacob celebrated each birth as the miracle it was, and Elena felt the last of her grief over Estrella begin to heal. The loss would always be with her, but it no longer defined her. She had built something new from the ashes of that painful night, something beautiful and lasting. As summer arrived and the foals grew stronger, word began to spread about the quality of horses coming from the Morales Thorn Ranch. That was what they called it now, a joining of their names and their dreams. Buyers came from across the territory to see the foals, and by midsummer, all 3 had been sold for excellent prices. With the profit, Elena and Jacob made more improvements to the ranch. They built a new stable, larger and more modern than the old one. They purchased 2 more quality mares to add to the breeding program. They hired a young ranch hand to help with the daily chores, giving them more time to focus on the horses. In the fall, as the aspen trees turned gold and the air grew crisp, Elena discovered she was pregnant. She told Jacob one evening as they sat on the porch, the same porch where he had first told her he was falling in love with her. "I'm going to have a baby," she said simply. Jacob stared at her for a long moment, his expression shifting through surprise, wonder, and pure joy. Then he let out a whoop of happiness and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down. "We're having a baby," he said, cupping her face in his hands. "Elena, we're having a baby." "I know," she said, smiling up at him. "Are you happy?" "I am more than happy," Jacob said. "I am terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once. You are giving me a family, Elena. After losing everyone I loved, you are giving me a new family." Elena kissed him softly. "We are giving each other a family," she corrected. The pregnancy was not easy. Elena suffered from sickness in the early months and exhaustion throughout. But Jacob was attentive and patient, taking over more of the physical work, making sure she rested and ate well. He brought her tea when she felt ill, rubbed her swollen feet in the evenings, told her she was beautiful even when she felt enormous and ungainly. In May of 1884, On a warm spring morning, much like the one when they had delivered their first foal, Elena gave birth to a son. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Elena thought of her mother, of the fear she must have felt. But Jacob was there, holding her hand, encouraging her, and eventually their baby boy entered the world with a lusty cry that announced his arrival to anyone within hearing distance. They named him Thomas, after Jacob's father. He had dark hair like Elena and blue eyes like Jacob, and Elena thought he was the most perfect thing she had ever seen. Jacob held his son with trembling hands, tears streaming down his face, and Elena knew that the broken man who had walked into her stable that terrible night was fully healed. Over the next few years, the ranch continued to thrive. The Morales Thorne reputation for quality horses spread across Montana and into the neighboring territories. They bred carefully and selectively, focusing on producing the best rather than the most. Elena's eye for bloodlines combined with Jacob's skill in training created horses that were sought after by ranchers and cavalry alike. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Rose, born in 1886, and another son named James, who arrived in 1888. The ranch house filled with the sound of children's laughter, and Elena could hardly remember the lonely, desperate woman she had been before Jacob arrived. She thought sometimes about that night in the stable, about how she had been certain her world was ending, about how Jacob had appeared like some kind of answer to a prayer she had not known how to pray. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked him one evening, as they sat on the porch, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was nearly 6 now, Rose was 2, and baby James slept in Elena's arms. "Which night?" Jacob asked, though she could tell from his tone that he knew exactly which night she meant. "The night you found me with Estrella," Elena said. "The night you sat with me until dawn." Jacob was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "I think about it all the time, Ariz," he said. "I think about how close I came to just riding past. I was tired, it was late, I did not want to get involved in someone else's troubles, but something made me stop. Something told me I needed to be there." "I'm glad you stopped," Elena said softly. "So am I," Jacob replied. He put his arm around her, careful not to jostle the sleeping baby. "That night changed everything for me. I had been wandering for months, lost and grieving, not knowing what I was looking for, and then I saw your light in that stable, and it was like a beacon guiding me home." Elena leaned her head against his shoulder, the same shoulder she had rested on that long-ago night. "You saved me," she said. "Not just the ranch, but me. I was drowning, and you threw me a lifeline." "We saved each other," Jacob corrected gently. "You gave me purpose again. You gave me a reason to build something instead of just drifting. You gave me love when I thought I would never feel it again." They sat together in the fading light, their children playing nearby, their ranch spread out before them, prosperous and thriving. Elena thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, all the pain and loss and unexpected grace. She thought about how sometimes the darkest nights led to the most beautiful dawns, and how love could grow from the most unlikely encounters. Thomas ran up to the porch, his face flushed with exertion. "Papa, will you play with us?" he asked, his eyes bright with hope. Jacob smiled and ruffled his son's dark hair. "Of course," he said. He stood and offered his hand to Elena. "Come with me?" Elena looked down at the sleeping baby in her arms, then at Rose, who was tottering across the yard, then at Jacob with his hand outstretched and love in his eyes. "Always," she said, and let him help her to her feet. They walked out into the yard together, into the golden light of the setting sun, into the life they had built from grief and chance, and the simple act of sitting together through the darkness until the light returned. The ranch that had once been dying now teemed with life and purpose. The woman who had once been alone now had a family that filled her heart to overflowing. The man who had been lost had found his home. And it all began on a night when a cowboy saw a light in a stable and decided to stop, when he found a woman crying over a stillborn foal and chose to sit beside her until dawn broke gently over the Montana territory, bringing with it the promise of healing, hope, and a love that would last all the days of their lives. Years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the rhythm of ranch life. Thomas grew tall and strong, showing his father's patience with horses and his mother's eye for quality. Rose proved to be fearless, climbing fences and riding before she could properly walk. James was quieter, more thoughtful, but with a gentle way with animals that reminded Elena of Jacob. The breeding program expanded steadily. By 1890, they had 10 quality mares and had purchased a second stallion, a beautiful black with an impeccable temperament. Buyers came from as far as Texas and California to purchase Morales Thorn horses, and the ranch that had once been on the verge of failure was now one of the most respected in the territory. Elena's brother Miguel returned in the spring of 1891, 8 years after he had left. He arrived unannounced one afternoon, older and weathered, his California dreams having failed to materialize. Elena had been angry at him for so long, but when she saw him standing at the gate, hat in hand and shame in his eyes, she found she could not hold on to her resentment. "I am sorry," Miguel said simply. "I should never have left you alone." Elena looked at Jacob, who stood beside her as always, then back at her brother. "You did what you thought you needed to do," she said. "I understand that now." Miguel looked around at the thriving ranch, at the children playing in the yard, at Jacob standing protectively beside his sister. "You did well, Elena. Better than I ever could have. Papa would be proud." "He would be proud of both of us," Elena said generously. "You for having the courage to pursue your dreams, and me for having the courage to stay and fight for his." They invited Miguel to stay, and he accepted gratefully. He proved to be a hard worker, humbled by his failures and grateful for the second chance. He became a beloved uncle to the children and a trusted helper on the ranch. Jacob welcomed him without reservation, understanding the importance of family, of second chances, and forgiveness. In 1893, Montana became a state, and the wild frontier that Elena and Jacob had known began to change. Towns grew larger, railroads expanded, and the lawless days of the Old West slowly gave way to a more settled civilization. But through it all, the ranch remained constant, a piece of the Old West preserved in the careful breeding of quality horses and the strong bonds of family. Elena thought sometimes about how different her life might have been if Jacob had not stopped that night. She might have given up, sold the ranch to those waiting vultures, left Montana for some unknown destination. Or she might have stayed and struggled on alone, growing bitter and hard. But instead, she had found love in the most unexpected of places, at the most desperate of moments. "Do you have any regrets?" Jacob asked her one night as they lay in bed, the house quiet around them with their children sleeping in nearby rooms. Elena thought about the question seriously. "I regret the pain we have both endured," she said finally. "The losses we have suffered. I regret that our parents did not live to see what we have built, to meet their grandchildren. But I do not regret anything that brought us to each other." "Neither do I," Jacob said. He pulled her close, and Elena rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I think about that night sometimes, about what made me stop. I tell myself it was chance, coincidence, but I'm not sure I believe that." "What do you believe?" Elena asked. "I believe some meetings are meant to be," Jacob said slowly. "I believe that sometimes our paths cross with someone else's at exactly the right moment, even if it does not feel right at the time. I believe you were meant to find me, and I was meant to find you." Elena lifted her head to look at him in the moonlight streaming through the window. "I believe that too," she said softly. "I believe we were always meant to sit together in that stable, to wait for dawn together. Everything that came after it all started in that moment of shared grief and unexpected connection." Jacob kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips. "I love you, Elena Thorne," he said. "I loved you when you were crying over a dead horse, and I love you now, and I will love you every day for the rest of my life." "And I love you," Elena replied, her voice thick with emotion. You are the dawn that broke gently over my darkest night, and you have been my light ever since." They made love slowly and tenderly, celebrating the years they had shared and the years still to come. Afterward, Elena lay awake for a while, listening to Jacob's breathing deepen into sleep. She thought about Estrella, about that terrible night that had changed everything. The pain of that loss had faded into a bittersweet memory, no longer sharp but still present. She thought sometimes that Estrella's death, as tragic as it had been the catalyst for everything good that followed. If the mare had not died, if Jacob had not seen her light in the stable, if he had not stopped to offer comfort to a grieving stranger, where would they be now? But she did not let herself dwell too long on alternate paths and what might have beens. The present was too good, too full of love and purpose, to waste time on speculation. She had her family, her ranch, her horses, and the man sleeping peacefully beside her. She had built something lasting from the ashes of loss, had turned her father's dying dream into a thriving reality. As she finally drifted towards sleep, Elena sent a silent thank you to the universe, to fate, to whatever force had brought Jacob to her door that night, and she thanked Estrella too, wherever the mare's spirit might be, for being the reason their paths had crossed. The years continued their steady march. Thomas married at 22, bringing home a sweet girl from town named Catherine. They built a small house on the edge of the property and began their own family, eventually giving Elena and Jacob 5 grandchildren. Rose grew into a fiery young woman who scandalized the neighbors by insisting on breaking horses herself and refusing multiple marriage proposals before finally accepting one from a horse trader who respected her independence. James took over the breeding program, his gentle patience with the animals producing some of the finest horses the ranch had ever seen. Miguel never married, but he seemed content with his role as uncle and brother, as trusted partner in the ranch operations. He told Elena once during a quiet conversation on the porch that he had learned an important lesson from his years of wandering. "I thought happiness was somewhere else, he said, "somewhere distant and exotic, waiting to be found. But I was wrong. Happiness is here, in family and honest work and knowing your place in the world. You understood that all along." Elena smiled at her brother. "I did not understand it," she said. "I just did not have a choice but to stay, but I'm glad I did, and I'm glad you came home." In 1905, on a warm summer evening much like the one when they had first met, Elena and Jacob sat together on their porch as they had done countless times before. They were older now, their hair gray, their bodies marked by years of hard work. But their love had only deepened with time, growing richer and more complex, rooted in shared history and unwavering commitment. "Do you remember this day 23 years ago?" Elena asked. Jacob thought for a moment, then smiled. "This is the day we got married." "It is," Elena confirmed. 23 years of marriage, 24 years since you walked into my life." "Best decision I ever made," Jacob said. "Stopping at your stable that night." "Best thing that ever happened to me," Elena agreed. "You showing up when I needed you most." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their grandchildren play in the yard where their own children had played. The ranch stretched out around them, prosperous and thriving, a testament to their hard work and shared vision. Elena thought about how far they had come from that desperate night in the stable, how much they had built together. "If you could go back," Jacob said suddenly, "back to that night, knowing everything that would happen, all the hard work and challenges we would face, would you still want me to stop?" Elena did not even hesitate. "Every single time," she said firmly. "I would want you to stop every single time." Jacob took her hand, his thumb tracing familiar patterns on her skin. "Good," he said, "because I would stop every single time too." They lived well into their later years, watching their grandchildren grow and begin families of their own. The ranch passed to Thomas and James, who ran it with the same care and dedication their parents had shown. The Morales Thorne name became legendary in Montana, associated with quality, integrity, and horses that were second to none. Elena never forgot that night in the stable, and neither did Jacob. It became part of their family story, told to children and grandchildren gathered around the fireplace on winter evenings. The story of how a cowboy found a young woman crying over a stillborn foal, how he sat beside her until dawn broke gently, and how that single act of compassion had blossomed into a love that lasted a lifetime. On a quiet spring morning in 1918, Elena woke to find Jacob had passed peacefully in his sleep, his hand still holding hers. She was 78 years old, and he had been 79. She grieved him deeply, but without the desperate, world-ending quality of her grief over Estrella all those decades ago. This grief was gentler, tinged with gratitude for the years they had shared, for the life they had built together. She lived another 2 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the matriarch of a family that had grown from two grieving souls finding each other in the darkness. When she passed in her sleep on a warm summer night in 1920, her family buried her next to Jacob on that same rise overlooking the eastern pasture where they had buried Estrella so long ago. The ranch continued for generations, the Morales-Thorne legacy living on in the quality of their horses and the strength of their family bonds. And on quiet nights, when the wind whispered through the stable, those who believed in such things swore they could feel the presence of two souls still walking the property hand in hand, the cowboy and the woman he had found crying over a stillborn foal, bound together forever by a love that had begun in darkness and grown in the gentle light of dawn.